Welcome to another episode of Me on Painkillers. So most of you have probably encountered people that find mundane tasks to be impossibly difficult if it would lead to challenging their fixed moral beliefs. A trend I've observed is the more self-righteousness a person is filled with, the less information they have on topics they're passionate about, e.g. Europe's current migrant crisis. A point I've heard repeatedly is that Lebanon now has around 25% of its population comprised of refugees, and this is an example why Europe can support larger amounts of refugees and should be copying Lebanon's example. The implication of arguments like this is that large quantities of refugees are not as big a concern as some people make it out to be. You may have heard similar arguments yourself. However, I contacted the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to find out if basing policy off Lebanon was actually a good idea, and they painted for me a slightly different picture. They also sent me this, the UNHCR Vulnerability Assessment of Syrian Refugees in Lebanon for 2015. I've been informed, though, there are talks of doing another more up-to-date study later this year for 2016. This is the best one around with the most comprehensive information, at least in their opinion, at the moment. If you'd like a copy for yourself, there's an article with a downloadable PDF version linked in the description so you can have one too. Things in Lebanon are not going well. Among other issues, only a fraction of refugees are food secure, relief efforts are severely underfunded and have resulted in large cuts in assistance, a massive 89% of households are reporting difficulty acquiring food, and also 89% are in debt between $800 to $1,000 American dollars, which in Lebanon is 4 to 5 times monthly income, more if factoring by household. Alarmed by information I saw leading to forced labor increases, I did some searching and rapidly found more up-to-date articles for 2016, regarding the expansion of the slave trade market in Lebanon. Slavery is very popular and very profitable if you know where to go for it. Small children sex slaves sell like hotcakes. Hell, anyone watching this video could buy a child molestation slave if they have the capital and know where to go. But this is what happens when you disorderly move mass quantities of humans from point A to point B. The relief programs are underfunded because no one cares, and it's not a headline anymore, so people get desperate for money, and in some cases are starving, which is a great stimulus package for the slave trade if that was actually what you wanted to happen. When asking to design migrant policy, can we at least agree on a standard to not keep refugees trapped in debt as debt slaves? Can we at least agree that slavery and starvation are bad? No? Okay. The thing is, people like John Oliver aren't malevolent. He doesn't twirl a mustache in the morning and say to himself, how can I promote slavery today? But by self-righteousness, people give themselves a moral entitlement to ignorance. They don't need to research because they know their position is morally right. So they say Lebanon's success is why Europe should have more people when they haven't looked at Lebanon and will unknowingly promote slavery. One of the focus group complaints is policy preventing refugees from working, and a consequence is seeking out illegal employment. This is a digression to a point more relevant in the Western world. It's sometimes assumed because the poor people have programs, quote-unquote, said programs are so functional, they can adequately care for a family, and it's reasonable for benefits to be removed once the household obtains income, despite the fact said income may be too low to sustain the family, and a rule against combining the two can keep them in poverty. And I have to wonder how many of the people talking about how Europe should open its borders have donated anything to ease the massive underfunding problem the WFP is currently dealing with, or are even aware of it at all. They don't seem to have bothered to check. Because yes, the UN does reply to info requests, or at least they did to mine. An odd thing about regulations is if they're designed by unqualified people with moral correctness in mind, they get out of control very quickly. A simple statement that seems innocent enough, like, once someone gets a job they won't need assistance anymore, can lead to people trying to work illegally to keep income off the books, or going into severe debt, complete with all the slavery-related consequences involved in both. People that want to ban things often don't understand what it is they're banning. They just know their position is right, and that's all they need to know for the ban to be pragmatic and cost-effective. Examples of this are commonly seen on all sides in prohibition debates. For instance, during the George W. Bush presidency, medical and firearm prohibition were more popular subjects. Not everyone remembers the medical treatment and research bans done by social conservatives in this time period, since the whole war on terror thing overshadowed more domestic policies, but I still remember the stem cells don't work slogans and similar medical bans that took place. A firearm prohibition point was that bans could be easily enforced because firearms are very complicated to take apart and put together. Most people parroting that line had never cleaned a firearm or so much as Googled cleaning one, but they felt their position was morally correct, so a Google search on cleaning a firearm was both not worth the time to verify, and also someone looking to smuggle large amounts of weapons could not and would not be able to do easily either. And people have hardly become more enlightened since then. Though major topics have shifted, the behavior pattern is the same. People feel morally entitled to a position and then support several regulations or prohibitions or similar wide-scale expensive policies, and because they've applied moral superiority and self-righteousness to themselves, they don't feel a need to research if it's a good idea or will even work, because their position is correct, therefore their position is practical and worth enormous amounts of tax money. Or if they do research, they only look for information from biased sources and often apply much higher standards of evidence to opposing positions and lower standards to things that reinforce their worldview. During my debates with people in favor of med treatment prohibition or firearm prohibition, neither would ever apply as much scrutiny to a position supporting their view as to one opposing it. There's no shortage of people that will invest substantial effort parroting a position and none verifying its credibility, a plague I've observed among both liberals and conservatives. It's odd the more convinced someone is of the righteousness of their cause, the more willing they are to make falsifications or acts of deceit, despite the supposed abundantness of evidence for said cause. Sure, if you sit an individual person down and ask them if they think the more passionate people are, the more calmness, rationality, and scrutiny should be applied, most people will say yes, but they seem to add a sort of disclaimer that the rule only applies to other people and not to them, because topics they personally feel passionate about are special and they know they're right, as if they were alone in this conviction. Perhaps it's human nature. If it's not a god they worship, it'll be an idea. People want some sort of certainty in life, so they'll try to build their own great truth if necessary, and engage in self-deception to preserve it. They know they're cutting corners when they disproportionately weigh evidence. They know they're doing something wrong, but they're hoping they will be proven right, and don't want to risk coming to the conclusion that answers are not so easy to come by. Unfortunately, the interest one has in a point does not increase the likeliness that it is true. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it as we made the universe a bit darker and more cynical today, and I'll see you next time. Later, YouTube.